Sure, and then we'll start. I hope I just didn't shout all those lovely people on the virtual.
Don't worry about the sound. We'll
Okay.
so just keep it close.
It's very good. Thank you for all your help. Is Fotis here? No, not yet. It's okay. He doesn't need to be here till the end. Just checking. All right. It looks like everyone stopped talking. Apologies for talking with a microphone that you can't necessarily hear, but I just want to let you know this microphone is for those virtual attendees, not for the people here. So I'm also trying to project at the same time. Welcome everyone to our session on community engagement. I'll come on this side. Community engagement that works, examining tools and successes and success stories of pathways to engagement in community-led organizations at a global level. It's a long name, we really love it, but what it really means is we're really interested in how RDA is a community that is both creating outputs and disseminating the outputs back to their own member communities, their own particular disciplinaries, their own particular research areas. And we couldn't do this without the help of, I did push the clicker. All of the lovely interest groups and working groups who have developed this session together with Najla, Connie, and Beth. So we have the Fair Sharing Working Group, we have the Professionalizing Data Stewardship Interest Group, the Engaging Researchers with Data, and the Early Career in Engagement. And I know many of you are members of one or more of these particular groups, and it's great to see you all here. And I love the fact that we're doing a joint session with 4 groups of the RDA, because this session is all about community. And I think that's really represented in the people who have come together to make this session today. What we're going to do is start with an introduction by Beth and Connie, and then we're going to move on to the lovely set of faces you see in the middle area, which are short talks, 1 slide each, from a variety of different people, past domain ambassadors with the RDA, current domain ambassadors, and other people who are very, very active in the RDA community about their particular community challenges and success stories. And these are meant to really guide you as we have a discussion in the last half an hour about the challenges you guys see in getting the work you do with the RDA out to the people who can really make use of it. And also in the other direction, finding new members of our community to bring in and engaging and exciting people about the RDA among your particular research communities. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Connie.
Thank you, Alison. So clicking is
that's the big one.
Yeah. Right, wonderful. Thank you. Hi, everybody. So for those of you that don't know me, I think I know many faces in the room, so that's really nice. My name is Connie Clare, and I am the Community Development Manager for the RDA Foundation. So essentially that means that I work on a global level with the Research Data Alliance. I only started in August, so I'm actually about, I think, 8 months into my role now. And my role is to facilitate the growth and development of the RDA going forward. So we've seen fantastic things happen over the last 10 years. But to think so I actually work with the different governance bodies, the council, technical advisory board, the organisational assembly, the regional assembly, and also the community groups, so the interest groups, working groups, and communities of practice. I was previously at 4TU Research Data in the Netherlands as a community manager, and my background is in developmental biology, so I studied a PhD at the University of Nottingham. And that picture there is myself and my son at the council meeting in Dublin last year, and he's also in Gothenburg as well. So if I'm a bit tired, it's because I've been up last night multiple times. So you all know about the RDA, I'm assuming, but I think it's really good just to reflect on what the RDA has achieved over the past 10 years. So it's become a global, consensus-based and community-driven organisation that comprises more than 13,000 international data experts. So it's a really large community. And it is supported by 71 organisational and affiliate members and 35 regional networks from 145 different countries around the world. So it's extremely international. And you'll know, being community members, that everything we do is based on this bottom-up grassroots volunteer community that make up more than 100 different active community groups, and they're the working groups, the interest groups, and we also have this community of practice. And they're the beating heart of the community that are responsible also for generating 150 flagship recommendations and outputs that are openly available for adoption and for reuse. And I don't think I need to go into detail. You've heard this from Hilary over the different plenary sessions about the mission, vision and guiding principles. But the aim of the community is to provide this neutral, open platform for various different stakeholders to come together to support one another in data sharing and reuse. So over the next 5 minutes, it's quite a quick whistle-stop tour, but I thought we can't talk about different success stories without talking about a few of the community engagement efforts that I've been working with. But also, I should also mention this is in conjunction and in collaboration with Catherine Barker, who's sat there. So Catherine is my counterpart as a community development manager working in the Oceania region, and you'll hear from Catherine during this session. I'll talk quickly about the 10th anniversary events and activities, also the community cross-fertilisation workshops that Catherine and I are running every month, and this new and exciting collaboration with Oracle for Research. And I think you'll hear more about that in the next plenary session today. I won't have time, unfortunately, to talk about the mapping of the RDA pathways, but one of the community engagement efforts that we're trying to do is to try and cluster and map this diverse work that the RDA community is doing. And to help us with that, I think, as well, is this new website that we're hoping to launch at the middle of this year. So that should help with a lot of the engagement activities. So about the 10th anniversary thematic events. So the aims and objectives is to really, with these events this year, they've already started in February, is to reflect on the past, the present and the future of the RDA, to reinforce our mission, vision and guiding principles, to recognise individuals within the community, but also the community groups and our partners and funders, and to also celebrate, and this is important I think for today, to celebrate what the RDA achieves with the wider research data management community and other communities that might not know about what we do. So this means that this event series is open to anyone. So you don't have to be a member of the RDA to join the events or to propose an event if you want to really showcase what you're doing within your institutions or organisations with the global community. And the idea was to celebrate 10 months, well, we have 10 months to celebrate 10 years of the RDA. So we actually manually mapped some of the group activities and we came up with 10 different themes, domain agnostic and disciplinary. And so each month from February to November is celebrating one of those themes. We have more than 40 different activities within the schedule, and this is all online on the RDA website, so you can go and check that out. So in February, we had events on fair data, fair software, fair hardware. Next month, we turn our attention to health and medical data, and May is jam-packed full of events and activities on metadata and technical infrastructure. And hopefully at the end of the year, we can have some kind of virtual event for everyone to celebrate what we've been up to throughout the year. So one of those events, and that's Catherine's picture in the top corner there, are these community cross-fertilisation workshops. So the idea was to bring some of the similarly focused interest groups, working groups, and the community of practice together to think about the future of the RDA for different themes. So in February, with the theme of FAIR, we ran a workshop. I think we had around 50 participants online within that workshop to talk about various challenges that different stakeholders face with regards to managing fair data. We also brainstormed some solutions and shared some other initiatives, tools, services, communities and organisations that we should also be aware of in this field. And the idea is that in these workshops, we also shortlist concrete actions that we can take forward as the RDA community. And so the main findings are always summarised in like a 2-page document. If you want to check those out, and these slides are available, we do have summaries from the pilot workshops from the end of last year. So one was on data management planning and also on agricultural data. And then the final thing that I have time to share with you is this, as I mentioned, exciting engagement with the private sector. So this is a new collaboration with Oracle for Research, and I do believe that Richard here from Oracle is at the back. So hi Richard, thanks for joining. This is an agreement that has actually just been put in place in January this year. And the idea is to really harness the power of industry to support RDA with various different fair data and open science developments, and to really inject some services to support the global volunteer effort. So we have 2 facilitated working groups. The first one will actually start in April. We've got a brainstorming workshop. So if you're interested in taking part, you can actually, on the slider on the website, there is a link to register. So this first workshop is domain agnostic, and that's going to be looking at collecting a list of successful methodologies and gaps of various different data sharing platforms, tools and services for open data collaboration and sharing. The next working group towards the end of the year will be domain agnostic. The topic is to be confirmed, but at this stage we think it will be on multi-omics data. So the brainstorming workshop will be to bring probably 10 to 12 people together. We have two workshops, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, obviously depending where in the world you're dialing in from. But the aim is to identify and define the focus of the working group so that we can draft a case statement. And just like with all the other RDA processes, this will be open to anybody. The working group will be open, and it will go through the normal review process. So it will go through council and it will be open for community review. So if you don't take part in the workshops, you can still take part in the working group when it's established. So the link is there in the slide. And I think that's all I have time for. Bit of a quick presentation. And I now have to hand over to Beth. But thank you for your attention. And we can always talk at the coffee break. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Connie. All right, I have a bunch of things in my hand. Hello, my name is Beth Kazook, and I'm the project manager for research data at the Digital Repository of Ireland. I started in this role in February of 2022, and I shared a picture here of me at my very first RDA plenary because I was lucky enough to go to Korea. I feel like a little bit of a poser being involved in this community engagement talk because I'm really new to RDA myself. Again, that was like my first plenary. This is the second plenary I've attended, and so it's really kind of the first one I understand what's going on. I'm also somebody who just kind of lingers in a bunch of interest groups. But the Digital Repository of Ireland has recently become a national node for RDA in Ireland, and it's going to be my job to be involved in engagement efforts. And so this is kind of an interesting opportunity for you guys to tell me about what engagement works so that I can just take all your ideas and then apply that to whatever it is I'm going to do to bring awareness of RDA to the Irish community. Oh, and I'm supposed to click with that. So very quickly, I am also involved with RDA and working with the RDA Secretariat and RDA Europe on a European funded project called EOSC Future. And I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail about the project right now. There is a poster that's out near the rainbow if you want to learn more of the details. It's basically RDA is participating in this project, and my task specifically is about widening engagement among underrepresented communities in the project. So the aim is to determine how to better support communities with low awareness or engagement in EOSC in increasing their knowledge of EOSC services and infrastructure. And the thing that's kind of come out of this work is a question around like, what does good engagement look like? What does success in engagement activities look like? And then how can the RDA help to connect EOSC to the global community? A major goal of EOSC is facilitating the means for sharing resources across disciplinary and community boundaries, becoming a cross-cutting data space for research and innovation. But what are those boundaries really? What are the mechanisms through which this resource sharing can be realized? And again, RDA is participating in this because there's kind of a recognition that this question is bigger than EOSC itself. It addresses open science and how are disciplines engaging in open science generally. And so I've had a number of conversations with domain ambassadors who are going to be talking to you today about their various engagement activities that are targeted to their specific disciplines. A key aspect of RDA's work, which my colleague Najla has been more involved in than I have, has been open funding calls to bring participation from domain experts and from research projects and infrastructures, connecting those experts working in open science to the RDA, working in open science and working in EOSC Future to the RDA community. We've asked a number of DAs that have been funded by EOSC Future, as well as former DAs, to speak today about the support they received for their engagement work and whether or not it was enough and what we could do differently if we would do funding calls again in the future. And just to kind of kick off the conversation, again, my task in EOSC Future has been focused on widening engagement across disciplines. So I've had a number of experts about the challenges facing disciplines that are kind of underserved by EOSC or are not engaging as much with open science, and also what are the successes in those disciplines. And this work is still ongoing, so this chart is not in its final form yet, but I wanted to share it with you to kind of set the stage for the specific examples of these things that the domain ambassadors and some of the other speakers that we've got today are going to be addressing. You'll notice the big pieces of the pie in the challenges section are really around data sharing isn't taught in academic disciplines. So there's no introduction that this is something that you have to do as part of your research in some of the disciplines. This is not obviously reflective across all disciplines, but also that data sharing isn't rewarded in a lot of disciplines. So if you're picking your effort, where you want to put your effort, you're not necessarily going to put it into data sharing if there's lots of other things that are taking your attention, and you're not going to get a reward for data sharing. Some of the successes in the disciplines have actually been around the emergence of data champions who showcase that data sharing isn't actually that difficult and how to do it and make it easy for their colleagues to do it. DMPs being required for funding is also a driver for participation in open science, and the availability of fair supporting workflows and tools. The people who use the tools that make things fair at the data collection stage find it easier to share their information later on because they don't have to do a lot of work to make it fair. It's kind of already fair to begin with. And that's enough for me. I am going to move along to our lightning round of talks for engagement successes and challenges. And did you want to kick this off? Okay, I think Anna online is going to be our first speaker.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Do you hear me?
Oh, yes, sorry. I'm the one with the microphone.
Okay, so yeah, thank you for inviting me to speak. My name is Hanna Slavets. I'm a consulting statistician and researcher at the Inner Renew Center of Excellence. Do you see my slides? Do you see the slides? I don't see them anymore.
Yeah, they disappeared for us too. Oh, they're back.
Okay, perfect. So I was there in the first round of Research Data Alliance ambassadors. I was one of the ambassadors in that first round, and I was the ambassador for renewable materials in engineering. So first, what were successes? So I was an ambassador for, I think it was almost 2 years. I was able to organize a meeting at an institution relevant for this field in France, and I had presentations in Czech Republic, Finland, and Slovenia. There was a very positive response from participants. They were really interested in the topic of data management. They wanted to learn more about it. And after my presentation, I did a survey also among all the participants to ask them if after my presentation they visited the Research Data Alliance website, and several of them did, and 3 even became members of Research Data Alliance. I also had a good collaboration with the National Research Data Alliance that organized some events, and I was also active on social media. I posted some blogs. And I'm still to this day, I'm receiving invites to give talks on this topic. So the presentations I had in Czech Republic, it was repeated 2 more times. So where I had some engagement, it was very successful. But unfortunately, my activities were not to the extent that I was planning originally, because I wanted to reach many more researchers. But so what are the challenges? What were the challenges that I faced when trying to engage a potential RDA community members? So first of all, this community that I selected, so the topic of engineering renewable materials, is maybe quite narrow. And it's not so much about that it's narrow, it's more about that it's also, it's not my personal field of research. My background is very different. My background is in social science statistics, and I'm currently working at this research institute with where my this is the field, the engineering is the field of my co-workers. And so I'm um, consulting them regarding data management challenges and also challenges they have regarding statistics. So the idea was, because this is an area that is quite like undeveloped in terms of data management. So I wanted to help and do a difference here. But when I was applying for the position of RDA ambassador, I was also considering to do it in my original field, but didn't decide to, because I think in my original field, data management practices are already developed to some extent. But if I did that, it would be much easier for me to do engagement activities, because I know more people there, more conferences. Here I had to rely on the networks of my coworkers. So I had to ask my coworkers if they can connect me with researchers at other institutions so that I organized workshops and talks. There was a problem also because in the delay in the start of the funding, so we had to wait to sign the contract for some time. And then because of that, there were also some time scheduling challenges. Another challenge was that I was also pregnant at the time when the contract started. So when I applied to be an ambassador, I wasn't. And then after I was pregnant, that limited my travel abilities. So a lot of the activity had to switch then to online because I couldn't organize then all the visits I planned. Another challenge was that at the beginning, I was expecting that we as ambassadors would be like really collaborating and working more together. So this is something that I missed, that I wished maybe there were some more of it. And then another challenge, so for the continuation of my work, so after the contract as ambassador ended, I didn't continue with the activities. And one of the reasons is that also my role within my organization changed. So when I applied for this position, I had this role of a consulting statistician, so somebody who, in a way, as a data steward, so somebody who is helping other researchers with data management. But in the same year, I was also successful in receiving a postdoctoral research grant. And so I also started then to focus on my research activities. So now I'm mostly managing my own data as a leader of a research project. So there is less time, unfortunately, to promote a Research Data Alliance and data management in general to other researchers. Okay, so that's an overview of what I did as an RDA ambassador and what are challenges. Again, thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you so much, Anna.
I just wanted to add thank you so much, because this is a really big part, isn't it? I was thinking mainly about community engagement in terms of broad scales, in terms of projects and what the limitations from a project point of view are. But there's lots of social limitations as well. And I think this is an important thing to consider when we're talking later on in the panel, Anna. So I really appreciate you giving us that information about how all of these sort of practical implementations and your role changing and your personal circumstances, and how all of this does affect how well we engage, not just with the RDA, but with bringing RDA back to our community. Thank you very much. Could you go on to the, oh, I have a thing. Oh, it's me. I'm next. I better time myself as well, huh? So I'm next, and I would just like to tell you a little bit about my domain ambassadorship. So Anna was one of the previous domain ambassadors, and I'm one of the current batch, of which we have a few here today, and it's really nice to see you all. My domain ambassadorship covers standards, domains, and I'm saying the word domain too often, aren't I? Standards, databases, and policies. And that's because I work as the content and community lead at Fair Sharing. And so what I've been doing as part of the ambassadorship is the creation of this community curation program. And what we did is we launched this whole program and asked for domain experts to come to Fair Sharing and start looking after a particular area of our registry and make sure that it accurately describes the databases used by that research area, the standards they implement, and the policies that recommend them. And we've had a great set of about 16 community champions right now that are working on that. And the RDA and EOSC have really provided a valuable source of talent. And so that's part of the successes that we've gained from our community engagement. And that is community engagement on a very particular mini community of fair sharing at that kind of level. But also we are working to implement with our champions various outputs from the RDA. And so we also are looking towards how we can successfully engage our fair sharing user and stakeholder community with the outputs from the RDA. And we do that by integrating those outputs into the fair sharing registry, making the information and the recommendations and the guidelines produced by us at the RDA available to people who are using fair sharing. And so we create new content with our champions. They've done hundreds and hundreds of edits in fair sharing. We've used them to leverage the RDA and their own personal communities to increase awareness among our stakeholders. We're developing educational material. If you go to our link down there on /educational, you'll see the first set of 6 fact sheets we've created on fair sharing together with our community champions, and we're launching this week as part of the RDA Plenary. And we've done a variety of joint blog posts and social media aspects to sort of talk more about the work that RDA does and that fair sharing does and that I've done in my ambassadorship. And I have to say that the ability to utilize RDA not just as a place to learn about all the work that's going on in the research data community, but also to engage with a network of like-minded people has just been amazing. This is my first in-person plenary. I've had 2 virtuals, and this is just the most magnificent community. And I think that we all need to remember the success side is just being here, the hundreds of us who have made it here. And on the challenges side, well, it's reaching the right people, isn't it? And I think that's something we're going to come back to a lot. How do you find the people that should make use of your particular RDA output? So for me, it's who can best make use of fair sharing? How can we help enable fair data by getting people to come to our site? How can we engage them in our community champion program? How can we reach them with our educational material? And so using the RDA helps us reach that community, but how do we go one step further? And in my other hat as a co-chair of the Data Repository Attribute Working Group, how do we make sure we're reaching the right people in the data repository community? And then we also have to think more long-term about the engagement for the future, both within the RDA and within the projects that are launched as part of the ambassadorship. We're also having to think about how we can find those RDA outputs that are most relevant for our community. And Connie mentioned a lot of the new features that are coming into the RDA website. And I have to admit, as much as I've spent some time on the RDA website, I was unaware of the outputs directory until Connie and Beth and I spoke about it. There's this magnificent directory of all of the outputs that are produced by every single working group and interest group. And I have to hang my head in shame because for the first year or so that I was at the RDA, I didn't actually know that particular directory existed. I was going to individual working group pages and going to their output tabs and reading. And that took quite a lot of time, honestly. But it was still interesting and helpful. But that's why I put under the challenges the finding of the outputs and knowing which ones are good for you. And then the last thing is measuring the success. I think some of the other people on the slides today are going to talk about it. We have what we hope will be a long-term community champion program. We want to see people coming and going and maybe coming back again as they have time in their work is low pressure. But we also want to see how much of a success we've made. What are the ways we can check indicators of long-term success of maybe the RDA as a whole with its outputs, but also of the projects which are a part of it, like the outputs of my ambassadorship on a smaller level than the RDA as a whole. And that's my 5-ish minutes, which is fine because I actually have a minute or 2 in hand, which means that we will stay on target. And happy to talk about any of this later, either in the panel discussion or afterwards. So would you go on to the next slide, please? And we have Lindsay. Lindsay, are you online?
Yes, I'm here.
That is lovely. Thank you, Lindsay. I'm going to leave it to you next.
All right, nice to meet you all virtually. I am over in the United States. I'm a national lab scientist and also an early adopter of the Fair Sharing Community Champion Program. And I kind of sit in a different space because I'm a researcher. I'm also located over in the United States. So a lot of the efforts that, get talked about with RDA and EOSC is not really where I sit in terms of some of the activities I do or the different things I'm involved with. But nonetheless, being in the fair sharing community and being able to add to records, being in across multiple different RDA working groups, because I'm very cross-disciplinary in what I do with my research and also the way that I support research. And so anything that I've done really applies to, putting in records for outputs from RDA groups I've been in, something that's relevant to my project developments or my sponsor requirements. And so building those really complex connections with a knowledge graph-based resource tool has been invaluable. And so that's a big part that originally kind of interested me in the program itself. And then as things have gone on, I've been able to incorporate these into various elements in my own working space, whether it's proposals, annual reports, DMPs, SMPs, digital publications. And so being able to point to a process and a fair foundation with standards has been really, really beneficial to some of the things that I've been working on. And then also been able to participate in internal and external fair initiative proposal review panels. So, what are these R&D developments? What do they look like? And what are the standards that they're implementing? And being able to be in a curation space and a research space allows me to see both sides to those types of developments. And so that's been really neat to be a part of this last year. And then increasing fair awareness. I think, being in a federal US space is different than being in an academic space or even, in other countries, the way that we do research is different. So being able to do work on the outside in the RDA groups, be a part of the fair sharing program, and then bring that in, have discussions with, domain researchers face to face, having conversations with software developers and research librarians has really been an innovative process, and that's really been beneficial as a whole. And then, being able to improve the boots on the ground work in research. So workflows, tools that are allowing these automated processes that really rely on the backbone of standards. And so those are some of the ways that it's just so easy to incorporate the work that you do when you curate back into your research setting. And so that's been a really enriching experience. In terms of challenges, number one on the list, the multiple time zones, that's killer. Experiencing that here right now. And then the lack of sustainable investment for funding internationally. So it's really hard to harmonize some of the really great work going on in, the Europe space or even internationally, and then bringing that back to the States and the kind of work that we're doing. And so how can you get some of these like-minded folks and those who are interested in that and that really great work that they're doing and have that be something funded outside of what you typically see, that's a very short life cycle of funding for some of these things. And then I also sit in the private versus public sector. So sharing and dissemination gap, just because you can't see it doesn't mean you can't incorporate the standards that are being developed outside of your direct community. And so that's a space I think has a lot of room to grow. And it's also a very challenging space that we're in right now in terms of open science. And then also just tracking some of the work that I've been doing. So being a researcher and a domain curator, and then facilitating various research data management activities is, that's not something I think a lot of people talk about. There are many different roles that are played, and, being able to know that that software can't pull in that type of data and it needs that standard or that standard. It's something that I think is developing. I think I'd love to meet more people that are doing that, but that's been kind of challenging. But as a whole, it's been a really engaging experience. So, and it's been really cool to see the new cohort come in, and it's really nice to have new perspectives, and it's been a really great experience. And with that, I will pass on to the next. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting point. I haven't even thought about private versus public or the talk about funding and investments. I think there's a lot of interesting topics. If you guys hang on to those topics that most interest you from all of these lightning talks and bring them up in the discussion in just a little while, then we'll have plenty to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to that. Should we go on to the next slide, please? So Francis, where's Francis? I don't see Francis. Has Francis? It's all right. What we can do is we'll leave it for now with Francis, and if he arrives and he can do it, otherwise I'll run through it at the end of it. Francis is another one of our domain ambassadors. All right, let's go on to the next one just for now. Oh yeah, could you move Lindsay down so that we can see a picture, so that people, if you see Francis in the corridors. It's okay, Pedro's next anyway. Come on up, Pedro. Pedro is another one of our domain ambassadors. Oh, we're there. Should we do Pedro and then we can do Michaela? Yeah? Are we good? No. Well, since Pedro is up here, we'll use Pedro if that's all right. And then Michaela, you'll go next. All right? Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Hi, everyone here. So my name is Pedro. I'm a professor at the University of Lisbon, Portugal. And last year I became a domain ambassador for catalysis, which is a subfield of chemistry or chemical engineering, however you would like to take it. And basically I'm part of these domains, as Beth mentioned, that are have low awareness towards open science and also low practice, of course. So, and based on the state of open data service, basically that's where I grounded my approach. And the approach is basically for young researchers, they are motivated towards open science in general, but they need the training to do it in practice. And for more senior researchers, they really need to be educated, motivated towards open science. So the success comes basically out of that. So for young researchers, we are mainly doing data crash courses, such that we have just a few words about open science and the FAIR principles, and basically we go immediately to curate their own data sets and get them ready to share. That was based also on a workshop we first did online where Connie was at, so that was really nice. And I'm mainly doing this right now in person. Then afterwards, there's also, I mean, of course, it's nice that you train people, but if you want to reach more people, you need a bit more of online way of people to get this information, and that's what we are working with the RDA chemistry webpage. So we got the basic content on the practice on how to share data in chemistry ready, and we are now circulating that through the chemistry research data interest group, and will be online hopefully very soon. And getting now to the senior researchers, my approach was basically getting into the largest conferences in my field and getting a session there on open science. So that's in my field very rare yet. And I was talking with conference organizers and got a session in this European Zeolite conference, so material conference in June. So basically I will do an interactive lecture on open science, and I will have a round table on a catalysis European conference late August in Czechia. So basically sneaking into the largest conferences to be able to teach senior researchers about open science and why should we all do it for the sake also of our own research community and the society overall. And then also through Alison, fair sharing curation program, we also got the first curator in chemistry in general, and that's Daniel, also from Lisbon, Portugal. So what are the main challenges? I think most people touched upon a few of them. One, it's the lack of awareness, of course, on my field on open science, so you really have to start from scratch. Then the second one is, get to the right people, and in my field, you don't really understand who is doing what. So I don't think that's only on my field, but still, it's, if you want to tell people where we are heading to, you need to know at least where we are today, and that's difficult to get, and it's then difficult to convey to people what they know they can take for granted. So that's one of the challenges, and with that we have been talking with IUPAC and also the chemistry research data interest group, and we are now, I think, getting to a clear picture on what are the current practices. Then also the fact that there's no clear pathway front, it makes difficult for people to trust and to invest their time into open science and open science practices. But that's again common to different fields. And basically there, I mean, I think what saves a bit is that funders are really concerned about the management and make data open. So that's what will guide most people in the next few years. And finally, I think Anna also mentioned it about the long-term funding. I mean, I'll be a domain ambassador for 15 months, if I'm correct, and that's, I think, yeah, still September, so it's basically 15 months. So it's a good period to kick off, but it's not enough to make something that is it's as a long-term impact in our community, and especially for a community that has low awareness to open science. I think I'll be able to get people to start talking about open science, but I think we need much more to make sure that these communities do start practicing open science. So I'm really hopeful that we can get some follow-up funding on this to also engage other young researchers that are eager to contribute but don't really know or don't have the means to do so. So that's basically what I had to tell you, and I'll be happy to discuss with you any of this or anything else you'd like just afterwards. Thank you.
It's fun, I asked you to advance the slides and I realized I've still got the clicker here. You went backwards. Well, what we're going to do is, I don't see Francis yet. I think perhaps he's managed to get himself into a different session. And what? Yeah. I mean, it's fine. He has the kindest of hearts. We shall do him at the end, and if necessary, we'll just cover it. It's not a problem. So I will go forward again, and then Michaela, are you there to do yours, please?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Lovely. You are perfectly clear. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Michaela. I'm the director of the Data Curation Network based at the University of Minnesota in the USA. I really wish I could be in Sweden with you all, but I'm honored to be joining you virtually to have this conversation. I wanted to start with kind of a caveat that I'm coming from a slightly different perspective. So I'm not an RDA ambassador. We're not talking about RDA outputs or work specifically here, but I'm going to talk more about our community engagement successes and challenges as a community of data steward practitioners. I want to start with a shameless plug that this Friday, March 24th, the Data Curation Network, or the DCN, as you'll hear me call it, is publishing a retrospective report where we discuss our community engagement in more detail. So if you follow along on our website or Twitter, which are at the bottom of my slide, you'll have the chance to read more about our work and engagement in that publication. Okay, now in 5 minutes, I'm going to ramble through a bunch of this, and I'm going to start with the challenges on the right-hand side of the slide. So the DCN has definitely encountered some challenges when engaging our community. I think first, and many others will agree, is that it's just really hard to balance all of the wonderful opportunities and exciting work with our very real limitations. So I'm the only full-time employee of the DCN. Everyone else volunteers their time and their energy because they're committed to seeing the DCN be successful. But again, I want to reiterate, they all have full-time jobs. And so moving forward, we're trying to be really protective of our time and energy so that we can focus on the projects that are really impactful for our community without burning one another out. We've also struggled with the fact that by far and away, the members of this community are primarily R1 or high research academic institutions. This kind of made sense in a way when we started the DCN, but as we've grown, we've become acutely aware of the fact that we could really benefit from different perspectives. But then we also hold in that hand that we've structured our organization to support R1s. And so we don't want to just recruit different organizations just to kind of like give ourselves a pat on the back, but we want to make sure that we can expand our services and models to allow for more diversity and perspective that benefits both parties equally. And the last challenge I wanted to highlight, and it's something that I think about from time to time, is that we want to make sure we demonstrate our impact, which is a direct result of the effort put forth by community members. But we often feel or wonder if traditional metrics might fall short. So we're thinking more about how we collect that really qualitative data to drive home the work our community is doing without relying on bulleted lists of numbers. And that leads me to some of the awesome things we've been doing on the left-hand side of the slide. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I wanted to highlight my two favorites in the interest of time. First, we rely on something we call our radical interdependence. And so by this, I mean that we rely on each other to curate data sets for each other. So our work is so linked up that we trust one another to complete work for researchers at our institution. And so we say that this is more than just cooperation. It's providing and receiving learning opportunities from one another. It's leaning on one another for support when necessary. And again, it's relying on folks outside of our organization to complete work for our institution. And so it's about collaboration and trust and accountability, not from a punitive perspective necessarily, but from a desire to show up for and serve one another based on clear expectations, clear commitments, and the shared goal of advancing the field. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of the work we're all doing, which I absolutely love. Anyways, I wanted to then transition to another success we've had, which is the very last bullet on the left-hand slide, which is what we call our peer compare series. So we've heard from our community members, and in fact, we still hear from them, that the most valuable conversations we have are the ones where we get everybody in a room to talk about a specific topic and discuss how we handle it at our institutions. So for example, we've had these peer compare discussions on preservation practices, data governance policies, metadata, and outreach strategies. And they really are just kind of safe spaces to say, here's what's worked for me, here's where I've been struggling, how did you advocate for X? And just really learn from one another. These have been incredibly well received. People, as it turns out, truly want a chance like this to talk about their challenges and their successes in an environment where they can learn from their peers. And so with that, I think I'm well under the 5 minutes, but I am so excited for the panel discussion afterwards. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to find me virtually. And yeah, thanks again for inviting me.
Okay, so that makes a good point. Of course, during the panel discussion, I don't have Zoom right here, but if you guys see anyone asking questions, or Beth, do you have it up? You have it up as well. I don't remember if you... Not in this one. So if you guys see anyone asking questions, then let us know and we'll make sure they have the space to ask them up on here. So I think we have Catherine. There you are. There you go. So here's Catherine Barker to talk about hers from the ARDC.
Hi, everyone. And thank you also for inviting me to present today. I'm I'm not on screen. Next one. The next one after this, yeah. I'm also maybe coming from a different perspective. I have a background in oceanography and Earth observation. In particular, before starting this role at the end of last year, I was involved very heavily in like scientific research project management. So that's just a bit of a preface to the things I'd like to say today. So I started my role in November as a community development manager for RDA, but on behalf of the Australian Research Data Commons. So anyone who heard Natasha Simon's talk yesterday will know a little bit more about ARDC. I'm hosted by Curtin University in Western Australia. And as Connie mentioned earlier, I'm working very closely now to produce workshops and events for the 10th anniversary this year. So I won't go into that too much because Connie already mentioned that. So maybe more from the ARDC perspective. ARDC is actually it's more focused on the infrastructure side of things rather than say like the research, but it has a very similar motivation and objective to the RDA, and comes to address open science and research data management issues in a similar way. In particular, it's very heavily focused on community consultation. So that's something that I think the ARDC does very well to involve the community in its strategy development, and in particular the new organizational structure, as Natasha described yesterday, is very discipline focused. But the strategy for each of the pillars has been based on a community engagement process. And my role now is to provide this sort of international view to the ARDC's strategy. So I'm part of the outreach business unit as a kind of cross-secting kind of horizontal, if you like, to that the strategic pillars. ARDC also provides a lot of institutional support. So I've been involved with roundtables. We get the Australian state institutions to come together, the librarians and data management support professionals to discuss issues around research data management. We deliver workshops, we support disciplinary projects in various ways, whatever is needed, workshops or skills development, skills training. So next on the list there is the ResBaz, if anyone's familiar with the Research Bazaar organization. It's focused on early career researchers and delivers like carpentry style training and a sort of a week-long kind of series of events around data management issues and anything that like early career researchers might need to really get into research and build their skills. And the MO of ARDC, much like RDA, is to publish everything openly online. Plenty of YouTube webinars, training presentations, and more. Previous to that, to my role with ARDC, I should say I was with ARDC a few years back as well. I spent some time as a data technologist with ARDC, so I'm back again, and because I really enjoy this community engagement aspect of my career, I guess, like where it's moving as I go through. But previous to this, I would say what I've learned from my project management experience is this open, it's not just about the open science aspect, it's about the open discussion with the communities that you're engaging with. So I've had the most success in my projects where I've been openly transparent about the project design, and involving them right from the start in that process, and through the process and right through to the end. And a couple of examples there. I'm currently still part of a working group for, it's a marine working group looking at underwater video imagery. And because of that engagement, they are providing data, they are providing their time, volunteering their time to help us assess the development of the software. And there's an Indigenous community engagement. I just wanted to mention this has been a very interesting component of one particular project, the involving the Indigenous groups in Western Australia in the process of a highly detailed scientific study of the rock art in that region, and how can we include the Indigenous knowledge and in the analysis. And you can do it, and this is something I've learned that's really quite incredible. You can include that knowledge in scientific analysis, but how do we do that, and how do we give them credit for that involvement, and eventually hand it over and give them ownership for that. So the challenges to this, so more on the let's say the RDA, the ARDC component would be how do we motivate people to get involved in global participation? I mentioned this a little bit yesterday in the panel discussion. Time zone differences are a challenge. So do we try and make that global connection, which is really, I think, what my role is partly to do, is to develop this community down in the Oceania region, or do we focus on the regional engagement, or do we do a bit of both? Resourcing is a challenge. It's just me down there. I've got the wonderful support of Connie, of course, but she's over here in Europe, and I have the ARDC as well. But so it's big, potentially a very big community down there. So I think resourcing is an issue. How much time have I got? I'm probably running out of time a little bit. Yeah, okay, I'll just finish up quickly. Yeah, identifying our champions in our communities in the first place. Who are they? Who are the people to engage with down there, and what are their requirements, and how can RDA support that? And then we've got to get this balance maybe and distinguish between the national objectives and strategies, so the ARDC strategy versus other national strategies versus the global strategy, the RDA strategy. And then, let's say in previous roles, more sort of specific to a project perspective would be, I'm sure everyone's encountered this at some point, like how do you encourage data sharing and communicate the benefit of that to your stakeholders, and building that trust in the data processing, the usage, the governance, and so on. And then on the cultural side of things, including that communicating very scientific concepts actually to a community who are not scientific and have a very strong cultural interest in the work you're doing in their area, and taking into account cultural requirements, where you can sample, where you can't, and the reasons for that. And so it's really critical to ensure that knowledge is respected, understood, included, but also find a way to make them feel like some ownership, and actually hand over that ownership to the work at the end. I think that's maybe where I'll stop.
That's lovely. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Okay, so actually, in theory, we are on to the panel. I pushed the button, but it. Shall I try it again? Yeah, so we are on to the panel discussion now, because what I think we'll do is I will leave Francis's slide just for now, and maybe he will. All right, I have sent him a message, but it's all right. We can move on. So I find this all really fascinating, because we just gave all of our short presentation speakers that slide that you saw. Tell us about your challenges, tell us about your successes, and we have gotten a really wide range of answers. Not only that, we also sent the same sort of questions to the interest groups and working group chairs and members ahead of this as well. And some of the questions you see here have come back from, for instance, Graham Parton, who's in the audience, and a number of those interest groups and working groups. So we already have some people thinking about things. And while I get the panelists up and get ready to introduce them, have a little look at this slide, and also think about the presentations we've just heard, and then we can get a discussion going, because we are I love the fact that we are, as a group, on time. And so that means that we have got an opportunity here, and I've got my old school note taking, because I'm worried about the power on my laptop, and we'll see what we come up with. And so we have here Roman, we have Fotis. Oh, it's not Devin, it's Ellie. I'm sorry, I didn't get time to put you back in, Ellie. We had a swap, and then me, because I'm representing the Fair Sharing Working Group. So if the two of you are right there, and Roman is just there, if you come and take a seat on the stools of power, and yeah, I can use that, or I can stand. It doesn't matter, Beth. Yeah, because I'm gonna also take notes while I'm doing it. So it won't be me running this part, but in just a moment, we're going to be asking all of you to start with your questions. And if you're all being a bit shy, we'll take something from here. But what we really want out of this, it's a community engagement session. So we want the community to engage in this part. Connie, do you want to have the power?
Thank you very much. So we're on to the panel discussion now. So I'm okay just to run through the questions. Yeah, so the first thing we're going to be focusing on now is visibility. I'll move over this side. Visibility and outreach. And yeah, I'll hand this round, and maybe you can also just briefly introduce yourselves as well as we answer the first question, if that makes sense. So the first bit is about visibility and outreach. So how do you identify and connect with your communities? What terminology and language do you use? What efforts help to ensure global accessibility, internationality, and cultural appropriateness of RDA outputs? There's quite a few questions to think about. I'm sure you've got your own answers. No, of course not. And how have you helped others in finding and navigating community engagement opportunities? Maybe, Roman, I can start with you. You can just give us a little bit of introduction about yourself, and maybe answer something about visibility and outreach, and some challenges or successes.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Romain David. I'm a data manager, data steward, or data scientist, or kind of things between these terms at ERINA, that is European Research Infrastructure on Highly Pathogenic Agents. So we were mobilized during the pandemic a lot, but also using the RDA output. So it was a good way to see that it was a really great result for us. For instance, with RDA by COVID recommendation paper that have involved more than 100% with radical collaboration way. So that was a good example that what could be community engagement. And I'm also co-chair of the Professionalizing Data Stewardship interest group and specialized on terminology. So there are lots of issues about terminologies. There are core things for FAIR principles. And we always speak about semantic artifact, but before that, just putting sticks on people's on what they are doing really in the real life, that's a big problem. That will depend on where they are, what are their language. In French, if we just traduce the English, nobody will answer and will understand you. For instance, if I say I'm data steward, my chief will say, okay, can you change the light, please? So I stop here.
Do you want to answer, or are you happy? I'm happy to let the audience. Okay, so Roman, sorry, you want to go ahead? No, it's fine. I'm just. Yeah, pass around the mic. All I was going to say is Ramon's given us a nice introduction about how he's made use of RDA outputs during lockdown in relation to COVID, and also about community and how we have to think about languages. And that's really high up in terms of visibility and outreach. So we'd like to pass the microphone around. Does anyone have any particular comments, either someone from one of the interest groups or has any comments? It doesn't have to be about visibility and outreach in general. It can be what you personally have found in terms of how you can use RDA outputs. Have they been visible to you? Have you seen any advertisements for them? Do you know how to get to the outputs you need? That kind of visibility. So does anyone have a question or a comment to make? Fantastic. That is, we're doing great on our engagement, guys. Oh, yes, Joy. I'm going to bring you the microphone.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's just to echo the fact that I struggled a little bit to find all of the outputs. We know that there's so many things coming out, and just the sheer proliferation of resources, it would be useful to help kind of encapsulate what they're meant to do, who should use them, what kind of expertise you need to use them, and at what stage of the life cycle. Because really, you can spend a lot of time trying to understand all of this stuff, but if maybe we can spend a bit of time helping people to know that, it would just make it easier. And it's something that we're struggling with right now in Fair Impact, which is another project. So if we could do this together, that would be great.
I bet Connie has an idea for that. Do you know, in relation to finding outputs and the proliferation of resources, but does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to that? Because I agree, there are so many. We are very prolific as an RDA community, aren't we? I think that we do good work, but it's about what to do. I know that you might have some words in the new website and things.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. Yeah, so obviously, as Alison mentioned earlier, we do have this online catalogue where we've got all of the RDA outputs and recommendations currently available. And you can filter to look for those. And we also have these small cards which show like a one-pager about the different recommendations and outputs that we do have. However, we will admit that they are quite hard to find, and a lot of community members and a lot of external visitors to the website don't know where to find them, and they certainly don't know how to navigate through them. So we have a new website coming, as I mentioned earlier, which I'm hoping will make things much clearer. So we're going to be tagging different RDA outputs because obviously they're also present on Zenodo as well for download. One of the challenges we have is that they're available through the website, but they're also available through Zenodo, and we can't easily track metrics for where people are finding them and where they're downloading them from. It's not very, it's not all very consistent. But also I've been working quite closely with Najla, who is just a great time turning around to the audience. Now, I was just going to say, Najla, we also have this new RDA maintenance facility, which is, as the name implies, hoping to maintain some of the outputs going forward and to make everything a little bit clearer. It's quite a technical project, so it's going to be like based on a knowledge graph where we can link outputs, recommendations with individuals, with groups, with plenaries and other events. So that will also be sort of like a search interface within the new website. But I don't want to say too much about that because also it's in progress at the moment and possibly likely to change. But Najla, do you want to add to it?
Well, I'll go back to the maintenance in a bit, but I wanted to give kudos to Connie and her team for the plenary pathways, because I think that's also a way of navigating the outputs. And I don't know if anyone's had experience and has anyone used them during this plenary to, yeah, so I see some hands. So I think that's a good way of distilling all the many diverse outputs into clear pathways. And what's interesting is that people over plenaries year, year after year, the pathways change, and I think it's TAB who's responsible for putting together the pathways. And I think people are looking to the pathways as a sort of a good way of almost cataloging open science themes and things like that. So I think we should use the pathways more to navigate our way through the outputs. And well, I'll shut up now, but I think I'll hand on. Yep.
Oh, there's also somebody online. Should we do the online person first and then raise your hand again when we yeah. No, it's fine. That's good. Go ahead, whoever's raising your hand. Okay, Laura.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So thank you. I was actually going to suggest perhaps a few ideas or suggestions. I've not seen the new website because it's not online yet, but perhaps you've already thought about this. But if you haven't, maybe this is still useful. I always thought when I sort of came to the RDA website for the first time that it was really very complicated to navigate if you were from one of those disciplines that it's less well represented on the RDA outputs. As a social scientist, the first impression I got from the RDA is, wow, this is all about agriculture. And that's fine. I have no problem with everything that relates to agriculture, but it didn't speak to me as a social scientist. So perhaps there might be on the about the RDA, some sort of section where you can say, if you're a newcomer to the RDA, this is how you can actually find things and have like a short video or a set of slides, a kind of quick navigation, because otherwise my impression also when I've tried to actually show to my social scientist colleagues all of the stuff that was there in the RDA that they could start using and thinking about and perhaps consulting, is that it's a little bit too daunting to really distill what parts of the information and the recommendations and the work that it's done there. And so perhaps there might be a way to get shortcuts through profiles and say, okay, if you're a social scientist, for example, maybe we can at least already kind of reduce the amount of information to just the outputs and recommendations that are going to be relevant for you, and kind of filter out all of those that are about agriculture that are unlikely to be of your interest. So some ways of kind of with filters and automatic options provide some form of guidance to navigation, at least for the newcomers. Then people will learn to navigate on their own. Thanks.
I think newcomer entry points are really good. I know we have discipline pages, but sometimes even if it is a big full on website. And so maybe I like the idea of short videos. I know Beth has been talking about that sometimes. Thank you very much, Laura. That's really useful. I think you had something you were going to mention. Do you have a
Sure, yeah. Yeah, obviously creating a easier to navigate website is a great thing. But if I look at my own workflows, then I use Google to find what I'm after. And usually I even forget which slideshow I was working on. I key in a few terms in my browser and I get where I want to be. So as long as you can convince Google that the best practices that you have available or the are the ones that are needed in the world, and that you make Google show them at the top, that's where you achieve your goals, I think. Looking at my own workflow.
It's a very good point. I spent a lot of time searching my Google Drive, for example, for presentations for the RDA plenary. I think that, you know, having someone on the RDA team who is super awesome in Google rankings would obviously help. I think that's a great point. Thank you. Did we have Lindsay on? Yeah. So Lindsay, do you want to go ahead? And then maybe we'll go to the panel after this.
Yes. So I just had a quick kind of thought and also interest going forward is being across a few different disciplinary working groups. What I've noticed is a lot of the outputs really, when in combination, would be such a great point moving forward, but there's no way to know how they interrelate or how they build on one another as well. So I think there was mention of knowledge graph elements or something in there, but you know, I don't know if even having records where you can connect the similarities between the working group outputs so that when new working groups start, they can build off of the outputs from other groups. And I think that would be a really interesting thing to look into as well.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for that point. Does anybody in the audience have anything to add before we go back to the panel on that comment? No? We'll move back to the panel and we'll talk a bit more now, I think, about the next points, which are measuring effectiveness and uptake. So how effective these activities are in influencing community practices. How should we determine what constitutes a good level of adoption and engagement? So thinking a bit about like, sorry, wrecking the room. How do we think about metrics and measuring impact? So I don't know if Fotis or Ellie, you have anything to add. Who would like to take the floor for this? Ellie?
Hi everyone, I'm Ellie Papadopoulou. I am the co-chair of the Engaging Researchers with Research Data Working Group, and I'm also the co-chair with my colleague Fotis in Engaging Early Career Engagement Group. So I will talk about what we did together with Connie and Yasmin and other colleagues. We are a lot of co-chairs in the Engaging Researchers with Research Data group, and we had a successful output published 2 years ago, maybe, which is called the Cookbook, Engaging Researchers with Research Data Cookbook. And I think what worked very well was, and I will probably, I'm adding answers to other questions as well, so I will use this opportunity to do that. What worked well is that we have a large number of co-chairs that are highly motivated and contribute equally their time to that, and we you know, we cover the region of Europe, of course, but we also cover US and other parts of other regions. So that helped us to expand our outreach activities and get more support staff, data stewards, and librarians involved in collecting their use cases, so learning from them what worked well, what are the challenges that they faced during engagement activities that they undertake. And I think that this is, so what worked well was, first was that. And then influence, in terms of influencing, I still remember one use case where data librarian, I think it is, from a university in South Africa or in Africa. I have to check my my notes. They were very determined to have a policy and have data and establish data services, because they believe that research data management is very good, and it can have an impact also in terms of cost effectiveness and all of that. So they were very determined and motivated to do that, and they started reaching out to researchers, to other departments and teachers, professionals, and eventually they reached out to the vice president of the university, and now, like this was a 2-year activity, and now they have a policy and they have started establishing data services. So I think we need to take into consideration all those elements and all those good use cases, and see what can work for us depending on the relativity of the situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie. And I think it just shows how powerful actually one person sometimes can be in trying to drive the culture change within certain institutions. It sounds cliche, but I guess you just need somebody that wants to do it and has the motivation. I don't know if anybody else on the panel wants to add to that before we go to the room. Yeah, we can go to the audience first. If anybody else wants to add, and particularly, I think that second point as well. Like, how should we determine what constitutes a good level of adoption engagement? Because when have we actually done what we set out to do is quite hard to measure at times. We set out goals, but how do we know when we've really achieved them? So I don't know if anybody has any nice stories to share. Have we got anything online? No? Okay, we go to, oh, we do. There we go.
Not a good story, more of a counter point. What do you do in terms of a hostile counter reaction to outreach? Speaking as someone who's experienced extreme hostility to work that I've done in the open domain without support and not aware that there is any.
That is such a good question, because I think probably maybe everybody here, well, I don't know, I certainly have experienced some hostility as well. And it's hard sometimes not to take it personally, I feel, when you feel quite strongly about a particular movement. Maybe I can come back to the panel for that. I don't know if Fotis or Alison, do you want to, yeah, you react then?
Right, so to go direct to the question, I'm sure this is kind of a common horror story across the RD community. I would argue that the short version, at least how I've been dealing with the similar situation, is essentially relying on the fact that RDA is still a quite open and positive community. So even if you have strong hostile pushback, it usually, again, from my experience, which is not extensive, comes from a shorter national or regional perspective. The fact that RDA is a global community and has the capacity of building a standard, a practice, a recommendation, and output that has a global outreach actually brings the strength to any kind of argument you can have. Ultimately, if it comes to that, it's between a policy or recommendation that is adopted by a region versus a policy or recommendation adopted at a global level. Usually the one that caves is the regional one or the local one, but it always has, it's not a nice experience to be in that position. So definitely acknowledge that. The fact that RDA doesn't have these kind of horror stories within itself is always a good indication, or at least, again, in my experience across the different groups I've been involved in. So this is where I would rely on as sort of a first reaction to that. I don't know if there are other approaches or ways that you can address these situations. But again, I'm quite happy to be part of RDA, mostly for this particular reason. It's open, it's positive, it's always, well, always constructive in the way that you move forward. So that's how I would approach it.
Yes, thank you, Fotis. I would like to add my voice to Fotis one and just give you an example about what we have to enhance and to measure as a good level of engagement. It's not only the reuse of outputs that are results, valuable, because they are really positive, a consensus, openness, inclusive, but also the methods. And I've seen lots of methods that were shown, used during this kind of plenaries, with lots of people working in a radical collaboration paper, for instance, led by Timea. It was a really amazing experience. And I replicate it in all research infrastructure where I work. So people are afraid at the beginning, but they say, yes, it's work. And I would like to be able to sit this kind of methods are some methods that are proved, the concepts of the method are proved in RDA. So perhaps we could have some kind of outputs that are methods to collaborate. Radical collaboration.
Thank you, Roman. And if I can just add one point actually to this, I think the one thing, just to answer Gavin's question as well, is that it is great to be around positive people that share this like-minded mission and vision to make yourself feel positive about it. But the one thing I always try to remember is we're not trying to convert people into like join a cult, right? So if they genuinely don't see the value in it for them, that's fine. You know, like at the end of the day, everybody's got their own way of doing things, and some people just aren't mentored in that way. And we do have obviously top-down policies that are starting to make a difference anyway. But I just think it's worth always bearing in mind that we can only guide people and practice what we preach ourselves, and hope that the eventual, you know, it will take it'll be taken on board. We move on to the final question so we're now thinking about sustainability and what kinds of activities can really help to sustain ongoing engagement. Have you been able to utilize the RDA's communication support tools? So I mentioned earlier on the website we have these little output cards. Not everybody knows that they exist. And do you have any ideas for what else would be helpful? So I think, Alison, maybe I can call upon you on the panel before we go to the room. Do you have anything to say on this? I'm sure you do.
Oh, Connie, you know me too well. Well, see, for me, I am faced mostly with these same problems. You'll find that this particular item was actually on my lightning talk slide. I think that you have to make space for community engagement managers, right? So in the same way as we've often been talking to funders and other people in those roles, that it's important to make space for data stewards and data champions from the point of creating the funded project from the very beginning. I think it's also true for community management people. And this is whether or not we're talking about the RDA and Connie, or anyone else within the project that you're using RDA outputs for. So I think in terms of sustaining engagement, that's really what I think we need to have. Always have someone who has the passion, but also the time to dedicate to it. It's a little bit of a waffly answer, and I would just like I'd like to hear more from other people if they have any particular success stories or criticisms. I think that the comment we had about hostile receptions is really important, and I think that sustainability, we must have some challenges here as well. So it'd be great to hear from you guys as well.
Thanks, Alison. We've got Najla in the room. Do we have anybody online, by the way, asking questions? No hands. Okay, Najla, over to you. Thank you.
Well, I'd just like to ask the panel. So, I mean, the particular what Beth raised. So we have this instrument in EOSC Future, which is a large, thank you very much, EU Commission funded project and we have had a subsection of funding these ambassadors and these other projects. RDA is coordinating that. So it's a very good way of having a way of engaging, and we have running the domain ambassadors. Is there anyone listening in online? I mean, I'd be very interested from a global perspective if other infrastructures have invested in this. I mean, unfortunately, EOS Future finishes. Our ambassadors, we hope, will stay in the RDA family forever. They may have other things to do, however, when the funding runs out. Is one of the recommendations from this meeting today that funders should support engagements such as ambassadors and grants and so on? Please, expert panel.
Just a very quick take on that. I've been ambassador for two such efforts. One was EGI back in 2020 something, and then again in RDA a few years ago. In both cases, it proved to be invaluable both to me professionally as well as to the corresponding communities, because it allowed for a particular domain, bioinformatics in my case, to be effectively communicated between an infrastructure which is usually domain agnostic or a community like RDA, and the more research-oriented parts of the same community that they might not know what their actual needs could be addressed in this infrastructure. So I would very much be keen on having such roles being consistently funded. We are actively trying to do similar efforts in Elixir with the other bioinformatics infrastructure, not to very much success, but it's sort of is one of the, that's the plan. It's more oriented in the training aspect, but this is also one of the key elements of community building, in that sense, capacity building. So it's definitely a key role in my mind, and I would be very much in favor of having this as a key role consistently funded across different projects.
Thanks, Fotis. I think in the interest of time, we might have to start wrapping up the panel discussion to allow Francis, who has just entered the room, to come and maybe present about his engagement activities. Sorry to cut that short, we were just getting into it, but obviously this is a really interesting discussion to carry on, I think, in the foyer when we have coffee. Thank you. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you. Francis, you found us.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm late. I'll just say something about what we did. The first question, I had a question about the ambassadorship. I mean, literally 3 seconds before I came up front, and that is, are we paid? And I want to say we're paid extremely well. I don't want to say how much it is because I like to keep it for myself, but we are paid really well. We're paid 15,000 euros for the hard work that the others do. And yeah, the most important thing about being ambassador is that you're addressed as Mr. or whatever your preferred pronoun is. Mr. Ambassador is what I prefer. So please, if you see me in the hallways or so, Mr. Ambassador, okay? I've been discussing it with my children as well. Yeah. So, what I have been doing for this incredible sum of money is I've been co-chairing with 2 other fantastic people, and that's true. A fantastic group of people. I mean, absolutely beautiful people. The RDA, Artificial Intelligence and Data Visitation Working Group. I've been participating in a number of academic, regulatory, and industry meetings. Sometimes I go to meetings where there's only people from the pharmaceutical industry, and I feel very much at home. And sometimes I come to a meeting like this and I also feel at home. No, I mean, I'm really working across disciplines and across sectors and looking at how we're dealing with data in the life sciences and with the regulations around it, especially a lot with the developing European regulations and the European laws. I think Brussels is just gone absolutely crazy with the digital world. So, and we're part of a plan. We should keep that in mind. We are part of the plan to digitalize European society and to digitalize the economy. And the open science structures that we're doing is part of this plan that the Commission and the Parliament and the Council have worked out for us nicely. At least in Europe, that's the way it is, I think, here. Yeah, then something happened back in February last year, which was kind of a disappointing thing. But I got involved with Ukraine because I have some colleagues that were there and they got in a bad place. So we put together something called the Ukraine Clinical Research Support Initiative. And we've been doing things with that, but also doing things with data in that as well. So that's, I think that's really important. And by the way, just with regard to that, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock in the Tesla room, we'll have a meeting on trying to look at how we can use the tools that are being put together here to support, let's say, crisis situations. So we'll have some people there from Turkey talking about the recent earthquake in Turkey and Syria, but also like looking at what happened with the health emergency, say pandemics, and then of course these geopolitical things that somehow get in the way outside of us. And then, of course, looking at how ethics and law can support open science and what the relationship is between ethics and law and open science. For example, next week we have a meeting at UNESCO looking at the recommendation of open science and how we can implement that, in particular, actually, in terms of a crisis situation, and also with the UN Data Week in China. And then what we're doing is also really through the AI-DV working group, looking at the roles of ethics committees, consent, and integrity in open science. So these are really huge questions, and the questions on consent, I think, is a fascinating question in Europe to see, and around the world actually, to see how the impact of data and the impact of, let's say, privacy legislation and so forth has changed, and I believe changed in sometimes fundamental ways, how we understand consent, and that also means how we understand things like fundamental freedoms and so forth, in relationship to sharing and in relationship to, let's say, really a digital economy, which is part of what we're doing here, I think. So it's time for me to stop. And thank you very much for listening. Yeah.
No, thank you. Sorry.
No, that's good. No.
It's very interesting. Yeah. Do you want to close up? Oh, you can close if you want.
So the session has finished. It's ended. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you got something valuable out of it. We now head for coffee, I believe. So thanks very much. And yeah, thank you to all of our speakers, our ambassadors and the panelists. When Beth was like,